obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Our Parking Industry Podcast. We are back for another roundtable episode with TPN and our team. So today I'm Krista O'Lean. We have Lee Thomas and we have Clyde Wilson here to discuss on-street parking. So on-street parking has become quite a hot topic lately with all of the increase in requirements for on-street parking and the demand for the on-street spaces and how our world is evolving to really need those spaces and use them in a different way than how it's been used historically. So Clyde's going to get us started with talking about the history and how on-street parking has kind of changed and evolved and everything he has seen and he has observed throughout his presence in the industry. Go ahead, Clyde.
Okay, so I won't go back all the way to the history and talk about the date the first parking meter was built, but parking, on-street parking has been around for a long time, and believe it or not, it was really a big part of small country downtowns. I grew up in a very, very small downtown that was about 25 miles east of Nashville, Tennessee. And as a child, for some reason, I guess I knew where I was headed in life. For some reason, I remember very well the struggles that my mom and dad would have when we would go downtown on Saturday. And all of the old country downtowns were a town square, so that they were square, perfect square. And in that square, on the street level, were dress shops, barber shop, restaurants, those types of things that serve that downtown country community. So we would go there. Well, there were parking meters. I hate to say this, 1955. There were parking meters. And so I can remember sitting in the car and my mom and dad struggling to try to figure out whether they had a dime or a quarter to put in the parking meter. And there was also, because the square was kind of big, you could actually double park, one car behind the other. So the car in the back didn't have a parking meter. So I can remember this, believe it or not, their discussion of, well, we can double park, it's okay, but somebody has to stay in the car. So if we're going in there, somebody's got to stay in the car. And it wasn't me because I couldn't drive the car. So I was always going to get to go wherever they were. But we went there a lot for, there was a restaurant that we liked to go to, so mom and dad would want to go there. So I remember parking there. Well, move forward in time, just about 15 years, and regional shopping malls had the precursor of Walmart was happening. The new first big box stores were happening. So those places all had shopping malls, the Target of the day, the Walmart of the day, had these huge parking lots, and they were all free. Well, the business owners in the little downtowns, were convinced their business had been decimated, and it was all because of paid parking. If you didn't have to pay to park the nickel or dime or quarter, then you would not go out to the shopping mall to buy what you could have bought right there in the town square. So there was this big controversy over paid parking. So the town that I grew up in removed their parking meter, and I can't remember the name. I don't think it was Tupelo, Mississippi, but the town that Elvis grew up in also had a town square. They had parking meters, and they had removed their parking meters also because of this belief that the big box stores had taken their business. So the cities reacted, took out the parking meters as though that was going to save the downtown stores, and it didn't. So then the downtown stores start complaining, and the complaint was, our business still hasn't come back. This is horrible. There's people parked all over the meter spaces now that are now free, and we don't have enough parking. So there were parking studies done. So this is the first time this comes to the surface, this story. They did the parking studies and they found out that, well, sure, you, Betty's dress shop owner, Betty, you're parked in the space right in front of your store. So your customer can't get there. And your employees are parked there, there, and there. And their employees are parked there, there, and there. So there's no other parking here except for behind your store that you know about, but your customers don't know what's back there. So you've got to move. So this starts the timed parking, the time zone parking, to stop employees from parking in front of their store, to help bring back the downtown. Now, I checked, and all of those little downtowns that had paid parking in 1955 have not, some of them, not all of them, most of them have not gone back to paid parking. So that transition of the regional malls and the belief that paid parking was killing them, but it wasn't. Target was just selling dresses at half the price you were selling at. And then the new destruction of there's cars all over downtown. You took the meters out, you're going to have to put them back. And we find out it's you. You're parking there, so we have to go to time zones. So then today we are now 70 years into the future, 50 years for the regional mall start. And we're still struggling with parking downtown, but we're about to go through another renaissance. We've been pecking at it for the last, what would I say, 20 years, I guess, that we've been pecking at changing how parking works in the downtown. We've moved from, in some downtowns, most downtowns still have the single space parking meter. You can pay with dimes and quarters, but you can also pay with a credit card now. So that's moved to credit card. That's helped a lot. And we're starting to have downtowns move to, and this has been happening for 15 plus years, to the single or the multi-space parking meter, where one box, electronic box on a square or on a street between blocks, everybody can walk over and pay that. And so we went through a lot of challenges with that too. We, the parking network, were involved in one of the very early studies of looking at how the single space or this single box would work on a street when people were used to getting out of the car and a parking meter was right there and just putting nickels and dimes in it. And now there was this single box and you had to know to walk over there to pay. And you know, we did this, and I can remember standing there watching. We stood off to the side and we watched people come up that had never seen one of these multi-space meters before and pay. And you know what? This was 20 years ago in a downtown. And the challenge was we're still seeing this today. Chris and I were just having this conversation yesterday. When you start making customers do things, you have to be really good at developing a communication to help them do that. So I can remember in this test that we were doing 20 years ago, it was a California town. It's a small town north of the San Francisco or the Golden Gate Bridge that we had chosen to do the study. And there were steps. First thing they had to do was touch the screen. That turned the screen. You had to read the steps. You had to touch the screen. And then you had to do this step. And then you had to do that step. And you could see them just shaking their head, not knowing how to follow all of these steps of things they've never had to do before, right? So as we have talked in the parking network about all the skills that you have to run a great parking operation, one of those skills is communication skills. And our recommendation back to the city, and we were testing, I think it was 3, and it may have been 4 different vendors' boxes. Our very first recommendation back was, you have to relook at how you're communicating to the customer to do this. They've never done this before. If we can't shorten this communication, then they're just going to struggle. And it's going to take a long time for acceptance to be able to do this. So The on-street people have gone through probably a wider range of changes than any other parts of the parking industry. And they're moving into a lot of these things that have been there now for 15 or 20 years, like multi-space meters. Now we've kind of moved into cell phone payment that's really been around for a few years, but it hasn't been widely accepted. We're starting to see really the move into the cell phone payment of on-street space. And, this gives you some tremendous capabilities because when you're doing through your cell phone, you as the city parking administrator communicate with that cell phone software. But when you're a parking meter, you can't communicate with it hardly at all. So you can't change your rates by time of day. And you can't, like if there's a ball game in town, you can't change your rates to charge a higher price on streets because it's ball game day. And even with the multi-space meter that was sitting on the street, they had trouble getting power to all of those. So you could do solar power and stuff, but then communications to them lagged until Wi-Fi comes along and gets there in a big way. But you still have trouble communicating with them. With the cell phone now, cell phone payment, and Krista and I were in the city yesterday on street, and we used one. And the great thing was, parking in the garage across the street was free for the first 2 hours. And they didn't publish the rates on street, so we didn't know. But Krista and I decided we're going to go park on street. There's this QR code sign there. We're going to use our cell phone to pay, and we're going to do it. So I scan the QR code. I get the information. It pops up, and I'm filling it all out and putting in my license plate number and my credit card number. And the price was $31.95. So free, $31.95. But they had full communication with that rate. And so you can change it on ball game days. You can change it on concert days. You can change it on Saturday and Sunday versus Monday and Tuesday. So it gives you this transformational time period that we're in, gives you these capabilities, and it takes really sharp managers of municipal parking spaces to start moving forward, staying on top of this, and making the difficult decision of, is it time? Are we ready in our city to move into this? So it was interesting to see the things that we saw yesterday. So that's kind of the history of where we've gone from. We had parking in 1955. I could find a nickel on the floor in the backseat of our car and say, "Mom, I got it." And to removing the spaces because of regional shopping malls, to then the move through the different types of parking to where we're moving into today. And then we have, and you guys can talk about this more, the tremendous new demand for on-street spaces. On-street, what's required now on street has become so challenging and complicated. So did I get us started?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that comes to mind with on street is that there's the transient on street parkers, so the people that are using those pay by time, whether it's a meter or QR code, whatever the technology is present. But then there's also the demand of the permit holders. So in municipalities, there's residential areas and there's areas that aren't strictly shopping or strictly retail, that there's residential people that need somewhere to park their car because they live in building A right there. So where are they going to park? So there's a permit system in place. And Rami, who we interviewed on the last episode from Park Houston, he talked about the transition that they've recently made with Park Houston to digital permits versus the hang tag permits, and kind of some struggles he's had there, but some really good optimization of their resources with the permits. So another piece, whenever you were talking, Clyde, that I really got started thinking about was how the QR code, or before, there had to be a lot of, I guess, physical meters present. So there had to be an investment there. There had to be an investment to put in these metal, I'm thinking way back, these metal meters that had a little turn dial on them. So there was an investment there. Then whenever you transition to the multi-space meters, there's a technology investment there. So you have to invest in those parking machines that people
Right.
walk up to. But now if we're moving into the QR code, all we've seen is a little sign with a QR code. The investment is minimal for those. So I think that's another positive change for the QR code idea, or the pay by space that's just you do it through your phone. It does put a little bit more on the customer because they have to have a phone that's working with service, but that's pretty common these days. So it for the municipality, the investment to make their on-street parking return revenue is less with the QR codes than it has been historically, even if we go all the way back. So I think that's an interesting piece to consider in the renaissance you're talking about.
Yeah,
So,
I think so. Go ahead, Lee. No, Lee, please go ahead.
oh, I was just thinking about, so the investment for municipalities is less, but the need for good management is more. Do I have that right from you guys?
Oh yeah. This
Okay.
this totally changes the parking world's view of the requirements of a parking. Where we went from really the days when I started up to just a few years ago of mainly we were managing cash collections out in the field, and the people, and not, we managed the people that went along with that cash collection. Now we're moving to this complete day-to-day management of parking rates, the technology involved, the information. So we didn't have any information. I, my surface lots that had the steel coin box, the only information I had was a piece of paper that my Coinbox checker wrote down. Stall one has $4 in it. Stall two has $5 in it. That's all I had, and I had hundreds of those stacked up in Miss Helen's safe. So you didn't get a lot of information out of that. Today, you're loaded up with information, and the information is critical, as we're seeing in many of the audits that we're doing right now. We are really getting a totally different look. And I think us as a team have had this conversation, and Krista and I've had it a lot, about how what we're seeing today really changes our world and how we audit a location and what our expectations at the end of the audit are. So yeah, this is changing everything, but it's really changing internally the people that we have in the very much, because they have access to information and they have to know how to use it.
And another, while we were talking about that and the QR code, and even the pay by space for the multi-space, those machines, they were all based on your license plate, and they still are. So that is a trend we are seeing continue for on-street parking, is the use of the license plate as your parking identification number. So as far as multi-space, you would go up to the machine and, put in your license plate, put in how long you want to park in that spot. So then the people going around writing citations, they would correlate your license plate instead of, I think back to the old metal meters where the red thing would pop up.
Right.
Yeah.
It's real easy to see that one's out, that one's expired, and there's still a car there. But with this, it's really, really heavily dependent on the license plates, and it's the same for the QR code. It's, you put in your license plate, that's how you identify who is parking for how long, and what controls need to be put in place if someone is parking and not paying. So that is a common thing we're seeing really increase, is the importance of the license plate recognition, your license plate number as your ticket number for garages. And now also on street, it's taking the primary in almost every field that we're seeing, every area of parking.
Yeah, what we're seeing in on-street's a very complicated place. There are so many moving parts to it. But the reality is, this transformational world that we're in is moving all through the parking industry now. And we're seeing it in the audits that we are doing. We're seeing what still to some degree kind of looks like the early attempts at being able to capitalize this. But we're seeing it, and we're seeing the move toward this more license plate oriented, QR code oriented. And I shouldn't even mention those other than it's this electronic world through your cell phone of the ability to park. And it gives so many capabilities to the parking manager now where, again, it's just like in one of the audits that we're working on right now that's in a district that has um, nighttime entertainment some specific nights of the week. So we never had the ability other than to have the parking manager, or not the parking manager, but an employee drag out a sign onto the street that says $20, right? Today, we can do all of that electronically and change those rates, look at the schedule of nighttime entertainment, make our parking rates match that schedule, and we can do all those things today. So the commercial parking operators are, because they have thousands of locations around the country, are in this race to try to keep all of those locations ahead of the power curve in technology.
I think that idea hits on the three things that Lee, Trina, and Clyde talked about in a previous episode: the detail, the organization, and the communication. So if there is an event, you have to, as a manager, pay attention to the details of that event. How many people will it attract? Is it a big event? Is it a small event? Where will they be parking on street? Will the demand be higher on street because it's at one of the shops right there? Or will the garage over here 2 blocks down have more of a demand? So how are you balancing that? What's the detail of the day-to-day draw to your location? Another piece of it is the organization. So you have to be organized enough and be thinking ahead enough to plan for those things. So how are you using your personnel to help you stay on track and stay ahead of those things so that you can plan accordingly? What system do you have in place to help with that? Because there might be something that comes up short notice. There might be things that are planned months and months ahead of time that you can really, really plan for. And then the final piece of those three things is the communication. So how are you communicating that internally, but also to the customers on the street? So you were talking, Clyde, about the sign that you used to drag out to change the sign, to change
Right.
the price. That's a communication piece, the signage. So is there something sent out ahead of time, like, hey, you can pre-purchase parking for this event, and it'll be maybe a little bit cheaper than if you drive up? Or like, what kind of communications? We've seen all different kinds, but what kind of communications are going on externally to the patrons or internally amongst yourselves? Like, hey, how can we do this better? Or what can we do to collect more revenue for this event that's coming? Anybody have any creative solutions? Are we going to stack cars because we're expecting that many people? Do we need extra personnel on site? So all of that comes in, all of it comes into play.
Yeah, it's so interesting how, as this group has really communicated many times about how do we convey the things that we learn, because we're in this unique position where we get to see a lot of parking operations. We get to just see it every week. It seems like we see new ones, and then doing the podcast, we've also agreed that in every single podcast that we've done with experts in the parking industry, there is always one thing in there that we could pull out that is probably something everybody needs to hear. So we pluck these little cherries out. So we've really been in this tremendous position. So we talk about it a lot and kind of trying to narrow it down to a theme. And so Krista's that she just described to us, the detailed organizational and communication skills, mastering those lead to the two most important things we have to do in the parking business. We have to provide outstanding service, and you can't do that unless you have the detailed organizational and communication skills done. And then we're in the parking business collecting money. So our second most important thing, and I think these two probably go hand in hand, one or two, is accountability. We have to be able to account for it. So you can't have outstanding accountability without having the three things that we just discussed mastered as a parking manager. So you as a parking manager, you as an organization, you master the detailed organizational and communication skills, and you get service and accountability. And I think today that's probably the most important message that we can give you, that we as the parking network are learning from the people that we interview and the audits that we do, that we see. It's just every time we do one, we learn something from the wonderful people out in the field in the parking business. They teach us a lot. We just have to be observant. And so we get to talk to you guys then about these wonderful things that we see. And we hope to then be able to convey those messages in a way that's helpful to you.
Along those lines, if our theory here at TPN right now is, if you are looking to improve your customer service and your accountability, then you should really focus on the details in the office. You should focus on the organization of your team. You should focus on communicating to the owners and also to the people parking in your facility. So if you'll tend to those details, then you can expect an increase in customer service and accountability. So it's kind of the baby steps to get to the desired outcome.
Yeah. I think, Lee, you can touch on this a little bit more, but I think one of the important things that Rami said in the previous episode was how the two things that come to my mind are his presentation of how he served his customers. He referred to them as stakeholders. How he served them was through the communication piece, and he really touched on that a lot. If you want to explain a little bit more, touch on it a little bit more.
I was also surprised by his narrative about the communication demands of his job. He had to be so creative and diverse when needing to communicate to the millions of people who live in Houston. But some of the things he mentioned was having like town meeting style presentations at pizza houses, at coffee shops. He sent postcards to the permit holders who needed the information. He and his office just spent money and time and put so much intention into communicating the new processes and procedures. I had never even thought about how many resources it takes to communicate well. I think we are humans and we're made for language, so we just assume that the conversation is going to go well. We assume that there will be time for conversation. But that conversation with Rami made me realize that if we have people in our care, we have to make time. We have to be intentional and creative to make sure that we talk to every person. And then my teacher self is also remembering that we need repetition. We need to see the same material multiple times and maybe in different ways. And I feel like Rami and his team really they're learning how to do that. And I think the whole industry would benefit from being intentional like them.
We'll take just a brief moment here. Krista and I, of course, spent a lot of time together the last couple of days. And one of the stories that I told her was, and I'll try to do everything I can to not let anybody know who I'm talking about, even though this was probably one of the best municipal managers in the country at the time, which was 25 years ago, when multi-space parking meters were just beginning to come out. And he was, like some other people that we know, way ahead of his time. So 25 years ago, we were starting to see some changes, and he saw this as a tremendous opportunity to help the city that he worked in to manage some new things that were starting to happen close to their downtown. So he went out, convinced the city to do this, spent $2 million buying this. But this was 25 years ago. The communication skills that we have today did not exist 25 years ago. So as much as he was doing the right thing, because of that communications piece, they weren't able to communicate to the larger public, and it failed. It failed miserably. And it was nothing to do with anything but the communications piece. It was a great thing that he did. The opportunities that he saw to really help his city were outstanding for the time. He was the only parking manager, city municipal manager, that was out there that far ahead of and understood where this new technology was going. But the communications piece didn't exist 25 years ago. They weren't able to communicate it. The public went berserk. And so within 3 months, the city pulled out $2 million worth of on-street parking meters and put them in a warehouse.
Wow.
It totally failed.
Change is hard.
Change is really hard.
Yeah, change is hard. And we've talked about that too. So if the patrons or the stakeholders know what's coming and know what to expect, and they can mentally prepare themselves that it's going to be different when I go down to this place I always go to, this restaurant we always go to on Thursdays downtown. If I go this time, it's going to be different. I know what to expect. I've heard it multiple different ways, repetition, like Lee referred to. Nowadays, we have communication where we could communicate through social media, through newsprint, through electronic articles, through advertisements on TV. I mean, there's a zillion different ways we can communicate. And I think exploring creatively, like Lee mentioned, exploring creatively all of those to increase that repetition and that exposure for expectations would be important. And I mean, especially with something new that nobody else was doing. So people in that downtown, it's not like they had gone to, it's not like that was a small downtown area and they had been to downtown Houston or something and experienced it before. Maybe some people had, but not back then. That hadn't happened. So it was everyone was experiencing it for the first time. And somebody always has to be the first, right? Somebody always has to be the first. But it's just a shame that communication wasn't put into place so that it could have been the first and been highly successful at the same time and really paved the way for everybody else.
Right. Yeah, the communications just didn't exist then. And so the person that was doing this was way ahead in all the skills that it took, the detail, the organization to pull this off. He knew what he was doing. He knew what the possibilities were. He knew what was coming in and about to change downtown with this new event that was coming into the downtown. He knew that. So he had the detail, he had the organizational skill to buy the meters, put it all in. But the communications piece just didn't exist at the time to be able to communicate to a wide audience. And it killed it. Today, though, we have no excuses.
So we're running a little long here from what we had originally planned, but I think it would be remiss if we didn't talk about the demand for the on-street parking and how that has shifted to these temporary uses. So I'm thinking about delivery drivers and Uber drop-offs and different things of that nature. So how Amazon delivery, I mean, all the different things. There's so many different ones nowadays. Rami talked about the permit process, things that Park Houston has experienced with people choosing to have permits and choosing not to have permits, and just kind of handling it both ways and being accepting of that decision on that company's part. But how has the demand for those on-street parking spots for that type of service changed from the traditional retail patron occupying a space?
Yes, well, probably the single biggest challenge today in managing on-street parking, and I've been watching this mature now for a little while, and I remember doing a job, I really try to, no offense to the people in the parking business in New York, we always try to not use New York as an example because it's so different from everything. But I was working on a job 5 or 6 years ago in New York, and I was being challenged about the demand for parking on street and what was happening in the garages that I was looking at, and saying, you're about to get pushed because the parking street meters are about to change. And they were laughing at me saying, this is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. The cities are never going to take those parking meters out. And I said, well, So let me read the sign of where I'm standing right now. I'm in New York. All the parking meters on the right-hand side of the street have been removed, so there's no parking over there for anybody coming to visit anything here. The parking on the right-hand side of the street is for Lyft, Uber, FedEx, uh, Uber Prime. So it's already happening. So you can tell me it's not going to happen, but the parking spaces are already being eliminated, and those cars have to go somewhere. So they're going in the empty space in this garage over here. They're going to fill it up, and you're going to have to manage it. And the revenue that I'm showing is going to go up because those spaces are all going to be taken care of with people who used to be parking on the street. So it's happening. Yes, I'm in New York. Guarantee you, this is coming to a city near you. The demand for Amazon spaces, Uber pickups, um, FedEx to drop off because we're now been through the pandemic. There's been this tremendous move to purchasing online. So now you have things shipped to your office downtown instead of going shopping. So the demand for a certain number of parking spaces in every block is really pushing this. And this is a tremendous challenge for the on-street city managers because that's such a big part of their business, and they have a city council to deal with, and they have all a public to deal with, and you're going to take spaces away and force me to go into this higher price garage over here. Well, we have to serve everybody, and guess what? Uber Prime and Lyft and the people who are trying to wait for a Lyft car to pick them up are part of the public. So we're here to serve the public. So we're really going to see this, and we're already seeing it. And Rami mentioned it as a part of the challenges that they now have. It's coming everywhere, and it's going to be more and more of a challenge to on-street parking and really push the three things: detail, organization, and communication to the max. Because look what you're doing. You're taking up a large portion of spaces that people used to have.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're telling me I can't park there. So that's a big change.
One piece of that is that to the municipality, if they are issuing permits, they're receiving revenue for those permits. So for the city, it's not necessarily a giant gap in revenue now that they're transitioning some of those transient parking spaces to permitted spaces. So that's kind of the flip side of that. Another piece, if I'm reflecting back on our experience yesterday, is that to park in the garage 2 blocks over, it would have been free for the first 2 hours. But to park on the street right in front of where we were going, we paid a premium. We paid $31 to park there, almost $32. So taking that into consideration and really planning, like, this spot is prime, so we need to take advantage of that revenue wise. So if people are willing to pay that to park there, then they are receiving that close, the proximity to where they're visiting, to where they're going. Whereas if I don't want to pay that, I have another option that is maybe a little more cost effective if I need it. If in that specific area there was another option or parking. We're close to Fredericksburg, where I live, and so if I'm thinking about the main street of Fredericksburg, it is busy, and that parking just along that little tiny town, the parking along Main Street is packed all the time. So you can drive around looking for one of those prime spots, or if you just go a block or two off of Main Street, there is somewhere to park that is maybe a little less desirable, but easily accessible and not expensive. So if there's an opportunity to provide both options, I think that helps with the customer service piece. So you're kind of appeasing both without sacrificing a need for those permitted delivery drivers or sacrificing revenue on the municipality on-street parking side. There's a good balance that can take place.
So to tell the whole story, when Krista and I parked on street yesterday, it was very, very important to us to get a place close by because we were going to the ice cream parlor.
priorities, okay?
So the on-street parking cost us more than the 2 scoops of ice cream.
It's true.
But
That is true.
it was right there. We
Mhm.
got out of the car, walked in, had our ice cream, and we're sitting in the window eating our ice cream in just moments. We didn't have to park 2 blocks away, even though it was free, and circle through a garage. It was getting to the ice cream was important. So
And
it's
maybe
just
we should have worked off our calories to get back to our car.
right. So it's it's just a matter of priorities, and the ice cream had the top priority.
Yeah.
So we paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
We paid for it. We paid for the convenience. So just to be sure, we told the whole story. Okay.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a pleasure. So thank you everybody for joining us on the Our Parking Industry podcast, where we got to talk about on-street parking in a roundtable discussion. I'm Krista Oline, and Lee Thomas and Clyde Wilson joined us today, and we thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time. To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on Our Parking Industry podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.